How is an empire born? I mean, really born. It doesn't just appear in some flash of divine light. Nope, it rises slowly, from dust, from sheer ambition, and from the life-giving currents of a great river. And our story, well, like all the best stories, it starts with a question.
And right after that, a deeper, more profound question. How on earth does a mortal leader, just a man of flesh and blood, transform himself into a living god? How does his authority become so absolute, so unquestionable, it's like the sun rising in the east? Well, to find those answers, we're going to have to travel back, way back, 5,000 years to the very beginning of a civilization that would literally shape our world. This is the story of Egypt's first dynasty. Together, we're going to pull back the curtain and see how a fractured land of rival chiefdoms was, well, brutally and brilliantly forged into the world's very first nation-state. This was an empire whose foundation was so strong it would support 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization. So let's get into it. Okay, but before we can even get to how this empire was built, we've got to understand the world before the pharaohs. Because you see, this wasn't one Egypt, it was two. A land totally divided, a tale of two completely distinct realms, connected by just one thing, the lifeblood of the Nile. I want you to just picture two separate worlds, okay? Down south, you've got Upper Egypt. This is the long, narrow valley carved out by the Nile, basically a ribbon of green, squeezed between these harsh desert cliffs. Their symbol, the tall, elegant white crown. Then, all the way up north, where the river fans out into the sea, you've got Lower Egypt. That's a huge, fertile delta, a world of marshes and incredible abundance. And their symbol was the very distinctive red crown. Sure, they were neighbors, they traded stuff, but make no mistake, they were separate. They had their own cultures, their own gods, and their own rulers. But down south, along the banks of the river, something was changing. Change was in the air. You started to see power getting concentrated in these really ambitious centers of wealth and influence, places like Hierakonpolis and Abydos. And from these cities, powerful, absolutely ruthless chieftains started to emerge. They began looking north. And they weren't just thinking about plunder. No, their eyes were set on a prize way bigger than anything anyone had ever imagined. A single, unified kingdom. So out of this crucible of ambition and conflict, one figure rises. Now, whether he was a single real man or a legend built from the deeds of many, well, that's up for debate. But what's not debatable is that his story became the founding myth of Egypt itself. And this, my friends, brings us to the unifier king, the man who would finally make the dream of one Egypt a reality. I mean, think about the goal here. It was nothing short of audacious. He wanted to seize not one, but both crowns, the white one and the red one, to unite two lands, two cultures, and two peoples, all under a single divine will. This was so much more than just another conquest for territory. This was the literal invention of a nation. So how do we know this? Well, our main piece of evidence for this absolutely monumental event comes from this single incredible artifact, the Narmer Palette. It was discovered in the ancient capital Hierakonpolis, and honestly, it's probably the most important historical document from this entire era. It's basically a 5,000-year-old stone record detailing the violent birth of a kingdom. And this palette, wow, it tells a brutal story in stone. On one side, you see King Narmer looking absolutely majestic in that white crown of the south, raising his mace to just smite a northern enemy. Then you flip it over, and there he is again. But now he's triumphant, wearing the red crown of the defeated north, and he's inspecting rows of his decapitated foes. Yeah. This isn't just pretty art, you guys. This is a raw, powerful piece of royal propaganda. It's a crystal-clear declaration of total victory and absolute dominion. And so, Narmer, who, by the way, a lot of Egyptologists think is the legendary King Menes you hear about in later histories, he establishes this powerful new idea. It's an identity that's going to define Egypt forever, the king of the two lands. And this concept, this whole idea of duality, of a perfect balance between north and south, it becomes the absolute bedrock of what it means to be a pharaoh for the next 3,000 years. So, Narmer's unification totally ignites the first dynasty. After him, you get this line of powerful kings. Horah, Jer, Jet, Den. Their names are still etched on ancient pottery and found inside the very first royal tombs at Abydos. And their job? Well, it was monumental. They had to figure out how to turn this bloody conquest into a stable, functioning country. So, how'd they pull it off? Well, they didn't just rule by brute force. No, they built the actual machinery of a state. They set up a really sophisticated bureaucracy with scribes to track taxes and all the tribute coming in. They seized control of vital trade routes, which brought in a ton of wealth from the Levant and Nubia. And this is crucial. They developed these super elaborate royal burial cults to really cement their divine status, making sure their power would last long, long after they were gone.
Right. Every new empire needs a heart, right? A center of power to rule from. And to really control the two lands, the first pharaohs knew they couldn't just govern from their old southern homeland. They needed a brand new capital, and boy did they choose the perfect spot to build their kingdom of mud and brick. Legend has it that it was Menes himself who founded the great city of Memphis. Back then, it was known as the White Walls, and he placed it at the perfect strategic junction point, like the very hinge between Upper and Lower Egypt. It was so much more than a city. It was this powerful symbol of unity, built specifically to govern a newly united people. And let me tell you, its location was a stroke of absolute strategic genius. From Memphis, the pharaoh could control the immense agricultural wealth of the Nile Delta, they could manage all those lucrative trade routes flowing in from the east, and they could administer the entire length of the Nile Valley all the way to the south. It didn't take long for it to become the political, economic, and religious heart of the new Egyptian state.
But here's the thing. Unification? It's one thing to achieve it, but it's a whole other thing to maintain it. And the unity of that first dynasty, it turned out to be pretty fragile. As the second dynasty dawned, you start to see these cracks appearing in the very foundations of the kingdom. And this led to a deep ideological struggle that really threatened to tear the whole new nation apart.
Now, the historical record from this period is, well, it's a bit murky, but it definitely hints at a time of serious internal conflict. We're talking maybe even a temporary civil war that split the kingdom right back in two. That clear, orderly line of succession they had in the first dynasty seems to have completely broken down, and a deep religious tension started bubbling up to the surface. Okay, to really get this conflict, you have to understand the core of their royal ideology. From day one, the pharaoh was identified with one god above all others, Horus, the mighty falcon god of the sky. The king was the living Horus on earth. He was the divine embodiment of order and rightful kingship. And that was totally non-negotiable. But, every force has its opposite. And the rival to Horus was Seth. He was the powerful, unpredictable god of the harsh desert, of violent storms, and of chaos itself. So where Horus represented order, Seth embodied all those disruptive forces that were always threatening the stability of their fragile Egyptian world. And then something crazy happens. In a move that must have been absolutely shocking to his people, one king from this era, a guy named Sen, completely breaks with tradition. He just casts aside Horus and adopts Seth as the patron god of his royal title. This was not a minor tweak, okay? This suggests a massive upheaval, maybe a political rebellion, maybe a deep religious schism, or maybe both. The forces of cosmic order and chaos were now in a head-to-head battle for the very soul of the kingdom. So how did this get fixed? Well, the crisis was finally resolved by the dynasty's last great king, Khepri, and in what you can only call a masterstroke of political and religious diplomacy. His royal name featured both Horus and Seth, standing together, totally reconciled, right over his name. He brought the divine rivals into balance, which symbolized the hard-won reunification of the kingdom after all that bitter turmoil. Order, once again, was restored. So, with the kingdom reunited and honestly stronger than ever, the core ideology that would sustain it for thousands of years was finally locked into place. This was what we call the divine mandate, the whole spiritual and political philosophy that gave the pharaoh his ultimate authority. And central to literally everything was the concept of Ma'at. Now, this was way more than just a goddess. It was the fundamental order of the entire universe, this all-encompassing principle of truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic balance. And the pharaoh's number one job? To be the champion of Ma'at, to actively uphold it, and to keep those ever-present forces of chaos from taking over. And so, by the end of this whole foundational era, you can really see the key pillars holding up the pharaonic state were firmly in place. You had, 1, a divine king, a living god who was responsible for cosmic order. 2, total economic control thanks to their mastery of agriculture and trade.
3, an efficient scribal bureaucracy to manage all the state's vast resources. And finally, 4, a powerful royal death cult, which used these huge monumental tombs to guarantee the king's eternal influence over the land of the living. So, let's step back. After centuries of conflict and innovation and consolidation, what really is the ultimate legacy of these first pharaohs? I mean, what did they build that could last not just for 100 years, but for 3,000?
You know, there's probably no better way to sum it up than this. This whole era was basically the birth certificate of ancient Egypt. The patterns they established right here, the divine king, the unified two lands, the concept of Ma'at, the centralizing power of a capital city, all of that would go on to define this remarkable civilization for its entire epic history. So, from the brutal struggles of prehistoric chieftains and the singular vision of one unifier king, a nation was born unlike any the world had ever seen. The two lands were finally and truly one. And with this solid foundation of power, ideology, and control firmly in place, Egypt was now ready for its next and maybe its most iconic chapter, the dawn of the Age of the Pyramids.